Double shadow. Mornings in their family always looked almost the same. The alarm rang at 7, a quick kiss from his wife, the smell of freshly ground coffee, and the sound of his child's laughter drifting from the next room. Alexey woke slowly, but always with that unshakable discipline that made his life predictable, maybe even a little dull. At the bank where he worked as a credit manager, everything was orderly. Numbers, spreadsheets, signatures, clients. His co-workers thought him as the perfect employee, calm, polite, dependable. His wife called him her Stonewall, someone she could always rely on. But no one, not even she, knew that at night Alexey became someone else. The double life was exhausting. By day, neat suit, polite smile, cold courtesy. By night, leather jacket, black gloves, a hard stare, and the readiness to act quickly, without hesitation. He didn't like to call it work, though that's what it was. In certain circles, he was known as a fox, a man who could move money, pass information, or make an inconvenient witness disappear. It had started a few years back, when debts had dragged his life downhill. He tried not to think about that now. These days he lived in two worlds, and the line between them grew thinner every night. That morning, he sat in the kitchen, half listening as his wife talked about their son's school. The words reached him in fragments. His thoughts were elsewhere. In his pocket, his other world buzzed. A coded text message. 23:15. Old docs. Alone. He swallowed his coffee and forced a smile. Yeah, of course I'll be at the parent meeting, he told his wife, though he already knew. Tonight he wouldn't. The day passed in routine. He checked documents, calculated interest rates, answered calls. But underneath, another rhythm pulsed, the pull of night. As evening crept closer, his heartbeat quickened. At 10:30 p.m. he stood before the mirror. The reflection staring back wasn't a banker. It was a man with cold eyes. Jacket, dark jeans, gloves in his pocket. He checked his phone again. Same message. The docks were damp and dark. Autumn wind dragged fog off the river, curling between abandoned warehouses. Alexey stepped under the flickering street lamp, its light shivering like it, too, was afraid to witness what would happen. He didn't wait long. A man in a trench coat emerged from the shadows. His face was hidden, but the voice was familiar. It was Gray, the go-between for every serious job. Got work for you, Gray said without greeting. Important. I won't lie, it won't be easy. Alexey stayed silent. Questions here had to be asked carefully. You'll move a package. Small case. But Gray leaned in. They may be watching you. So caution above all. When Alexey asked flatly, tomorrow night. Address will come a few hours before. He nodded. Gray studied his face. Fox, you understand this isn't just another job? If you screw this up, not even I can save you. A chill spread through his chest. But he had long since learned not to show fear. I understand. Gray disappeared as quietly as he had come. Alexey remained under the trembling light, feeling the world split in two. By day, a father his son called a hero. By night, a shadow among shadows. And it was no longer clear which side was real. He returned home after midnight. His wife was already asleep, a nightlight glowing beside her. The room was heavy with silence. He laid down, but sleep wouldn't come. He heard her steady breathing, saw his son's toys in the corner, yet in his mind, Gray's words repeated. If you screw up, not even I can save you. It felt like he was balanced on two chairs at once, both tipping over the edge. One wrong move, one careless word, and his life would shatter. But worse than fear was something else. He was getting used to the darkness, the debt that lingers. The past never truly disappears. It sits in memory like a shard of bone that can't be pulled out, surfacing when least expected. For Alexey, the past was dead. A single, seemingly small mistake that turned his life into a double existence. 5 years ago, he'd been different, still at the bank, but in a lower position, unstable pay, no security. His youngest son had just been born, his wife on maternity leave, and expenses grew by the day. He tried to manage weekend jobs, extra shifts, but it wasn't enough. That summer, he made the mistake. The bank took on a new client, a supposedly successful entrepreneur. In reality, it was Viktor Prozorov, known in certain circles as Prozor. His money smelled like everything but legitimacy. But he had charm, expensive suits, gold watch, disarming smile, and most of all, the knack for spotting weaknesses. Young man, Prozor once told Alexey while filling out loan forms, "I see you're honest and responsible. Shame they pay you peanuts for it." Alexey tried to joke it off, but Prozor's eyes narrowed. "I could help you. I have a project. All I need is someone good with paperwork. Easy job, serious money." At first, Alexey refused. But a month later, with bills piling up and his wife crying from helplessness, he remembered the offer. The project was money laundering through fake accounts. All Alexey had to do was shuffle documents and overlook small discrepancies. He convinced himself it wasn't really a crime, just paperwork, just survival for his family. The first envelope of cash came in the basement of a restaurant. The bill smelled of tobacco and foreign hands. He felt shame and excitement. With that money, he cleared debts and bought his wife a new stroller. But appetites grow. Soon Prozor handed him tougher jobs. "You know how to stay invisible," Prozor praised. "And you've got a brain. I need men like you." And Alexey agreed, because every time he thought of stopping, something new came up. The apartment needed repairs, hospital bills arrived, bank fees piled up. One evening, as he stayed late at the office to finish another scheme, he got a call. His son had a high fever. His wife was sobbing on the phone. He rushed out, but a black Mercedes cut him off. Two men forced him inside. Prozor was waiting. "You, Fox," he said for the first time, "have talent. But remember, debt is sacred. You took my money, you work for me. There's no way out." His eyes glinted like steel. From that night on, Alexey knew he no longer owned his life. His name was just a mask. The real man belonged to Prozor. Over the years, projects turned into real criminal operations. Cash runs, package drops, meetings with men whose hands were long stained with blood. At first, Alexey thought he was just a cog. But soon he realized he was part of the machine. The nickname Fox stuck fast. He had a knack for slipping out of danger, inventing excuses, lying convincingly. But the truth beneath was simpler. He was afraid. Now, lying sleepless beside his wife after meeting with Gray, he remembered that first envelope. If only he'd resisted. If only he hadn't reached out his hand. Maybe today he'd be someone else. Maybe life would be simpler, cleaner. But the past can't be rewritten. The debt he took then had become the weight he carried every day. And because of that debt, tomorrow night, once again, he would walk into the dark. Fragile balance. Every morning, Alexey put on his suit, knotted his tie, and became the perfect office man. Sometimes he almost believed it himself, that this was his real life. The desk under the green glow of a banker's lamp, colleagues who addressed him formally, endless spreadsheets filled with numbers. But the moment he closed his eyes, other faces appeared. Prozor, Gray, the ones who always came at night. By day, he could be convincing. At the office, they valued his calm, his precision. Clients trusted him. But at home, the cracks began to show. His wife, Elena, sensed something was wrong. Her questions grew sharper. "Why are you coming home at 1 a.m. again? Why is your phone always on silent? Where's all this extra money coming from?" He answered with rehearsed phrases. Work, reports, a bonus from the boss. But every time, his voice betrayed him, trembling just enough for her to notice. The hardest part was looking his son in the eyes. Little Artem always waited for his father at bedtime, begging for a story. Sometimes Alexey made it, sometimes he didn't. And when he didn't, the boy would sulk, turning away and falling asleep without a good-night kiss. That stung far worse than the threats of Prozor or the stares of his thugs. The next assignment came quickly. Gray called late at night. "Tomorrow, transport. Cash. Nothing complicated. But the cops have been active lately. Be careful." Alexey agreed out of habit. The next morning he went into work, forcing himself to look calm. But the tension followed him everywhere. When a colleague asked him to review a loan agreement, He caught himself reading the same paragraph for the fifth time. That evening, he ate in silence, then slipped out while Elena was putting Art into bed. In the hallway, by the mirror, the transformation happened again. The banker dissolved and the fox emerged. The meeting spot was an old garage complex on the edge of the city. Waiting there was a familiar courier, a wiry man with a sharp nose and a smile that unnerved more than it reassured. They called him Smoke. Fox. Smoke grinned, always on time. In the trunk of his beat-up Opel lay 2 duffel bags. Smoke winked. You're part of the road. Take them downtown. Others will handle it from there. Alexey nodded, transferring the bags into his own car. He didn't ask how much money was inside. Better not to know. The drive wound through the sleeping city. Streetlights shimmered on the wet asphalt, and it felt like he was floating down a dark river. He obeyed every traffic law, careful not to draw attention. But a few blocks from the drop, he noticed a headlight in the mirror. Too close, too steady. His pulse spiked. The car behind him never tried to pass, only mirrored his every turn. Police? He swerved suddenly into a narrow alley. The car followed. Sweat broke across his forehead. Another turn, then another, and suddenly the street behind him was empty. He stopped, exhaled, wiped his hands on his jeans. Maybe it was nothing, or maybe a warning. At last he reached the destination, a shopping mall's underground garage. 2 men in black jackets were waiting. They grabbed the bags without a word. The whole exchange lasted less than a minute. As he turned back to his car, one of them, short, bald, with an unblinking stare, stepped forward. Tell Praza the city's heating up. A big sweep is coming. Alexey nodded, driving home. The man's words echoed in his head. A sweep meant raids, arrests, crackdowns, and it could easily reach him. At home, the apartment was silent. Elena sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea, waiting. You're late again, she said calmly, though her voice carried fatigue. You're not telling me the truth, Lyosha. He forced a smile. Work. Reports. You know how it is. She held his gaze, trying to pierce the wall he'd built around himself. That look weighed heavier than any threat from Prazer. I don't believe these excuses anymore, she whispered. You're hiding something. He turned away, because the truth was impossible. In bed, he lay awake for hours. His fragile balance rested on lies that could collapse at any moment. He was forced to walk the line between 2 lives, one like domestic ordinary, the other dark, criminal, consuming. And each day the line grew thinner. In the end, even he didn't know who he really was, the banker or the fox. And the answer might cost him everything. Black cash. In the underworld, they always said, your worst enemy isn't the cops or even your rivals. Your worst enemy is chance. Chance decides whether a patrol car stops you, whether an alarm goes off, whether a red light holds you just long enough. Chance can ruin the best laid plans. Alexey knew this. But once you're in the game, there's no way out. The next job came unexpectedly. Gray called him in the middle of the day, while Alexey sat at the bank sorting through loan files. Fox, tonight's going to be hot. Prazer wants you on this one. What is it? Alexey asked quietly, glancing around to make sure his colleagues weren't listening. Black cash. Big money. You'll transport and deliver. Needs to go clean. His stomach nodded. Cash runs were always high risk. And big money meant that if anything went wrong, they'd erase him without hesitation. Understood, he said, and hung up. At home, he lied about a night audit. Elena didn't argue anymore. She didn't believe him, but she didn't ask either. That silence cut deeper than any reproach. That night, he drove out to the warehouses by the river. The place was empty except for the whistling wind. Smoke was there, along with 2 strangers. On the floor sat 3 heavy duffel bags. All here, Smoke said, lighting a cigarette. Your job, get them to an apartment in Petrovsk. They'll be waiting. Alexey stared at the bags. They looked like bombs, heavy enough to blow his whole life apart. How much is this? He asked before he could stop himself. Enough to buy a couple banks like yours, Smoke laughed. But you don't care about that, right? Alexey kept silent. He loaded the bags into the trunk of his Ford. His hands trembled slightly. He tried to hide it. Every streetlight felt aimed at him. Every security camera locked on him. The route was simple. Through downtown, then to the building with the underground garage. Too simple. And simple was always the most dangerous. The drive went smoothly until the sudden appearance of a police checkpoint. Flashing lights, armed officers, document checks. His heart slammed against his ribs. Stay calm. You're just a banker going home from work. But the duffels in the trunk felt like boulders. The line of cars crawled forward. When his turn came, an officer in a vest stepped up. Good evening. License and registration. Alexey handed them over, forcing his hand not to shake. The officer shined a flashlight in his face. Were you headed home from work? Alexey said evenly. The officer circled the car slowly. Sweat rolled down Alexey's spine. If they told him to pop the trunk, game over. You can go. The officer finally said, waving him on. Alexey drove off. But a few hundred yards later, blue lights flared in his mirror. This is it. The end. He swerved sharply down a side street. Then another. The siren screamed behind him. He drove blind, like in a maze. Then silence. The police cars sped past. He'd slipped into a courtyard and killed the engine, hiding in the shadows. He sat there, barely breathing. Only one thought ran through his head. Chance. That was chance. By dawn, he reached the Petrus department. The same two men in black jackets were waiting. They took the bags wordlessly. One of them muttered, "You almost blew the whole operation. Be sharper, Fox." Alexey said nothing. Back home, he collapsed into bed. Elena stirred, watching him with weary eyes. "You were somewhere you shouldn't have been," she whispered. "I can feel it." He closed his eyes. There was nothing he could say. The next day, Gray called again. "You handled yourself last night, Fox. But listen carefully. Now both the cops and our people are watching you. You're under the microscope." Alexey stayed silent. He knew his life no longer belonged to him, and the line between chance and catastrophe was growing thinner by the day. Double game. After that night with the black cash, Alexey felt as if an invisible spotlight was fixed on him. No matter where he went, into the bank, the grocery store, even the playground, he couldn't shake the feeling he was being watched. Shadows on the street seemed to take human form. Every car stopped too close. Every phone call made his heart race. But the worst part wasn't that. The worst part was a suspicion he started to see in Elena's eyes. And from her, there was no hiding. Days passed. Alexey tried to live his normal life. Go to the bank, checking on loans, pretend the only thing on his mind was the next interest rate. But inside, he knew something had shifted, and the change came without warning. One evening, as he was leaving the bank, a man in a dark overcoat approached him. He looked like any office worker or lawyer, utterly unremarkable. "Mr. Alexey," the man said calmly. "May I have a few minutes of your time?" "Excuse me, do we know each other?" Alexey asked, instantly on guard. "Not exactly, but I think we have something to discuss." The man showed a badge. Senior Investigator, Organized Crime Division, Igor Vlasenko. Alexey felt the bottom drop out from under him. They sat down in a nearby cafe. Vlasenko ordered tea, his calm gaze fixed on Alexey as if this were already an interrogation. "You understand why we're meeting, don't you?" he asked. Alexey said nothing, gripping his spoon so hard it shook. "We know about your ties to Prozorov." Vlasenko went on. "We know about your late-night trips. And about what happened last week on the avenue." "You're mistaken," Alexey muttered mechanically. "I'm just a bank clerk." Vlasenko smiled faintly. "Listen, Fox," he said deliberately, using the street name. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last to get pulled in. We get it. You're not someone who started out in crime. You got a family, a kid, and I want to give you a chance." A chill spread through Alexey. "What kind of chance?" "Cooperation. You give us information. We give you protection." At home, he paced the living room, torn apart by two forces. On one side, Prozorov and his people, who never forgave betrayal. On the other, The police, who could lock him away for years. Cooperation. The word felt like a death sentence. If he agreed, he'd be signing his own warrant in the underworld. If he refused, sooner or later the police would catch him with evidence. There was no way out. A few days later, Lysenko called. "Have you thought it over?" "What they find out?" Alexey asked. "Then we'll cover you. But don't forget, we're running out of time. We're building a case against Prozorov. We need someone on the inside." Lysenko's calm, steady voice was more frightening than any threat. That same evening, Gray met him in a bar in Podol. "Prozor's pleased," Gray said. "Says you did well last time. There's another job coming. Bigger one." Alexey swallowed his whiskey and nodded, though his insides felt doused in ice water. "What job?" "Transporting documents. Very important ones. If they fall into the wrong hands, we're finished." Gray leaned closer and whispered, "And listen, Fox, if there's any leak at all, you'll be the first one we question." The air seemed to thicken around Alexey. He was caught between two worlds, and both demanded loyalty. That night at home, he watched his son Artem sleeping, clutching a toy car with a smile on his face. Pain clenched Alexey's chest. Why did I drag my family into this? And how do I get out? One thing was clear. Soon he'd have to choose, and every choice meant danger. The next day he met Lysenko. "I'll do it," Alexey said quietly, "but only if my family's protected." Lysenko nodded. "Agreed, Fox. From now on you work for us." And in that moment Alexey knew he'd officially stepped into a double game, a game with no winners.